On this 4.5 billion-year-old planet, our direct human ancestors arrived only 200,000 years ago, living as hunter-gatherers. Modern humans arrived only 10,000 years ago with subsistence agriculture, village life, and being constrained and dependent on nature. Then, quite recently, with the Industrial Revolution, all that changed. And that was only 200 years ago. The first oil well was developed in 1859, then automobiles in 1886, and most importantly, electricity in 1895. In less than 50 years, humans had transformed this world far more radically than in all of its previous history. The natural threats and the feared superstitions were no longer menacing, because now man controlled and tamed wild nature. Or so he thought. Human lives began to improve dramatically and suddenly. For many, life was no longer Hobbesian, that is, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Modern life gave us safe food, sanitation, antibiotics, and our lifespan more than doubled as our population exploded. It's appalling to realize that only 70 years ago, global population stood at 2 billion, but now has quadrupled to almost 8 billion. And that's in just a single lifetime. But these improvements came with a big price. As humanity added 30% more carbon to the atmosphere, and suddenly, the most serious threat of all arrives, and we can't even see it. In our exuberance to grow and prosper, we've unleashed forces into the atmosphere that could destroy us. Yet so many seem unwilling or incapable of responding. What is it about the way we have evolved to think and act that is shaping this world that we have so recently created? Right now, we are already seeing the future. With widespread drought, fire, floods, famine, resource wars, and waves of desperate climate refugees. Scientists tell us that we are living through the first human-caused mass extinction. Is it even reasonable to believe that we who created the problem in the first place might also be able to
Actually tells us where we come from and why we are the way we are to this day. But it doesn't really tell us where we're going, because evolution is not a process that has a particular destination. Organisms evolve, but they don't necessarily become more advanced or better.
Natural selection shapes individual organisms to get the exact right balance between how much is spent on this aspect of life versus that aspect of life, this part of the body versus that part of the body, this piece of behavior versus that piece of behavior, expenditure of time on one activity, like, say, sex, as opposed to another activity, like, say, feeding. And the economics of this is very complicated, but fundamentally we understand the utility function that's being maximized. It's gene survival.
An organism wants to live. It tries to live and to reproduce and create offspring that will also live. But its primary thing is to keep on living.
Evolution is blind. There is no goal as such. It just is the set of attributes which are best suited to the changing environment.
Biological evolution happens very, very slowly compared to human lifetimes, and we probably hardly changed significantly over the last few 100,000 years. And what adaptations there have been adaptations to living in small tribal communities.
Our ancestors never encountered conditions in which natural selection would produce a species that would think broadly in terms of either time or space.
Stone Age people didn't worry about the future. They were focused on present needs, short-term survival thinking and immediate gratification. We're still the same.
We can trace human ancestors for a period of at least 4 million years, and modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, for at least the last 200,000 years. Our ancestors encountered conditions in which they knew their own territory, and they knew something about the territory of neighboring peoples, but they certainly didn't know much about the world beyond that. And this is the normal human condition.
As human beings, we live on very different timescales. As a species, we live on timescales of millions of years, and then as individuals, we live partly on the timescale of where the next meal is coming from, and partly on the timescale of our children, but we don't live much beyond that.
If you look back at 100,000 years ago, when behaviorally modern humans are emerging, we live in a world that we don't value the future much. There's no point in waiting for things because we don't have any way to, say, preserve our food, dependably. We obviously don't have refrigerators. We don't have hedge funds. We don't really have things that make waiting useful. And it's also, sometimes you get killed if you wait for things. Someone steals your food, someone, runs over you, they steal your mate.
And we are, of course, genetically disposed to act here and now when there is an imminent danger. And we are a very successful species because we are very creative in handling crisis in the last minute or in the last second.
So we are biased toward quick results, and we're always looking for the fastest payoff because we don't have a lot of time to waste here. And we're hunting and gathering, so a lot of our food is stuff that we're collecting right away. We're eating it within a day, maybe two. Not a lot of preparation, certainly not a lot of storage. All that'll come later, but in the meantime, that's who we are in terms of our biology.
We've got strong relics of our evolutionary past. It's a struggle for us to break away from the lack of foresight, the short-termness which bedevils the whole of the rest of the natural world.
Humans are basically simplistic thinkers, good at responding to immediate threats and problems. Unfortunately, climate change is an extremely complex problem, of long and slow duration.
We are the same people with the same basic programming, facing a totally different situation, which is happening at a time scale thousands and thousands of times faster than that's what evolution happens. Evolution happens over hundreds of generations of natural selection, of survival traits.
Suddenly the time scale changed, and we became obsessed with things that happen in microseconds.
The society we live in has changed so dramatically and so quickly that there hasn't been enough traction for natural selection to work on to really change the internal workings of our brain. So in that sense, it's called the mismatch hypothesis. There's a time lag between how the brain evolves and how society changes. At this point, we're left with brains that are similar to what they were on the eve of the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago, and probably very similar to the way they were 250,000 years ago, but in a vastly different environment.
We're very, very notoriously bad at predicting what our behavior would look like and how we might experience life into the future.
We adapt mainly to conditions as they are. The selection pressures that are exerted upon human beings, just like the selection pressures that are exerted upon all other animal species, come from the existing circumstances, not what the future circumstances are going to be, even though we are hell-bent on the process of changing the future from what they are now. We don't adapt to the future, we adapt to the present. And that means we're ill-adapted sometimes to a changing future.
And there's a tendency to think that evolution represents a tried and true, kind of product. And anybody that works in evolutionary biology will immediately contest this. There are too many examples in evolution of things that once they were invented were never improved thereafter.
We've all grown up in a world in which societies are complex and for the most part wealthy, at least in the industrialized countries. Life expectancy is long, and we all enjoy a great deal of abundance. We can consume most anything we want. And so we tend to think, since we grew up in such a society, that this is the normal human condition. In fact, it's highly unusual. The way we live is an anomaly. Early societies, even through the Middle Ages and up until almost the modern era, had 90% of their economies devoted to the production of energy, primarily in the form of food. That meant that 90% of what people did involved producing energy, in other words, just getting by. This is the normal human condition. People lived short lives, infant mortality was high, most diseases could not be cured, and life was very different from the way it is today.
We humans, like all other species, are naturally exploitive. Except that now we have the capabilities, the tools, the energy resources to dominate this planet.
The planet isn't an ATM machine where we can go and just keep taking withdrawals and withdrawals and withdrawals. The planet isn't that kind of machine, and yet we treat it like that. In fact, when we make deposits, what we're putting back into, quote, the machine is often damaging, poison, toxic, and life-threatening.
One of the issues of climate change is that we are all contributors to this problem. We all, to greater or lesser degrees, contribute to this issue of global warming and climate change, whether it's through the foods that we eat or the travels that we make or the kinds of pollutions that we emit into the external world. It's very, very hard to think about what it is that the problem is and who it is that we can blame, because after all, we're ultimately to blame, and people don't like to blame themselves for important social problems.
This is the crisis of the civilization of these times, that here it is, things happening on a planetary scale, it's a scale of problem that humanity's never faced before.
We have to basically give up the burning of fossil fuels very, very quickly, and a whole culture that's totally dependent upon them in one way or another, not just energy, but the chemical industry, plastics, pharmaceuticals, so much of that comes out of that whole petrochemical industry.
We use oil, we mine oil from underground. We use oil to mine more oil from underground and to mine everything we use. Now think of the world without minerals, without oil, without gas, without iron, without copper, without zinc, without whatever you have. Then it doesn't work. We cannot have a civilization without this immense flux of minerals.
The way we live today is really a product of the last 200 years, partly coming from the Industrial Revolution, but very largely coming from the subsidies of fossil fuels that have allowed us to escape the constraints of current solar energy. Instead, we live on solar energy stored from ages past.
We know that climate change is happening as a result of human activity. That's about as certain a scientific fact now as there exists out there. The evidence is overwhelming. Now, we also know that the public is polarized, with some thinking it's obvious and others thinking it's a hoax.
There's no question that right now the power is with the people who are not open to recognizing just how severe the crisis really is, and will do just about anything to keep the status quo seeming like it's the only reasonable way forward.
Big business, corporate energy, and numerous politicians will fight to maintain the status quo and perpetuate this lifestyle they have given us. And why not? They've gotten rich. Many people have gotten rich, and life's been great. Besides, change is always risky and difficult.
Those people who are in the most power in society, those politicians who occupy those most privileged and powerful positions in the United States, are going to be less willing to take an active stand against climate change because of material interests of other parties that they serve.
We are immersed in systems, ways of thinking, institutions that are fundamentally expressions. They are the creators of the problem.
It's shocking in a way. The magnitude of problems we face, the absence of mental resources at the levels of making decisions that can go ahead and take appropriate responses.
The problem, as I understand it, is that the people who are making money now in the sort of traditional ways that they've made money based upon coal and oil and natural gas and so forth, don't want to give up that way of making money. You know, if we just spent 2% of our world's GDP on climate change, you know, we could solve it relatively easily. But if we wait much longer, it'll be 20% of our GDP.
We have people getting together, a round table, we'll make, okay, what do we do? And the conference is useless. We speak about things, but we don't do anything.
If Pearl Harbor or its equivalent were attacked today, we would immediately declare war. Climate change, which is far more dangerous, destructive, widespread, and long-lasting, just gets more meetings, talk, and discussion.
If the interests of those on the upper end are harmed by this change, even though globally it would be a good idea, then you don't bet on it happening.
It is amazing to watch from the outside how threatening the possibility of regulation is to somebody whose worldview consists of free enterprise, free market, people just doing what they want in an unregulated manner.
capitalism is organized in such a way that it allocates money to where we get the highest short-term profit. And democratic society is, of course, put in place so that what most people are in favor of is decided.
Man-made climate change is an entirely new phenomenon that we have never before experienced. And not enough people trust the scientific warnings about the seriousness of the threat. Why do you think that is?
Most people, when you ask them what they think the mechanism is, they often just draw a blank, or they launch into an explanation, and then they realize they don't know it. So the basic greenhouse effect is due to this pattern of visible light coming in, being absorbed by the Earth, being shot off the Earth as infrared light, and most of it being captured and then recycled around in the atmosphere before it gets released. It's sort of delayed in its energy release. And the greenhouse gas has been great for us because without it, we'd be terribly cold. The average temperature on the planet would be somewhere around 0 degrees Fahrenheit instead of its more balmy 58 degrees Fahrenheit. So we'd be this big snowball if it weren't for the greenhouse effect. The problem is with climate change is that we're dumping more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that's creating an extra greenhouse effect. And this extra greenhouse effect is really climate.
And in a catastrophic way. There is no way anymore that we can actually control that development. We have already now waited too long.
Climate change becomes so bad that large areas of the planet become impossible for humans to survive, and the agriculture is destroyed, and a lot of people die of starvation. You know, these kind of things are part of the models. We have to tell these things. Right? If we do, people say that you are catastrophist, which is fine, but we still have to tell these things. But the problem is that when we tell these things, people don't react. They are scared. They tend to retreat and say, ignore this. It's so horrible, so awful that we don't want to hear it.
There's no heat. There's no electricity. You cannot read. There's no television. There's no internet. You take a double shot of whatever you take a shot of, and you climb into bed at 8:30 and pray your way through the night.
All the experts say one of the phenomena of warming world is more extreme hurricane seasons, and of course hurricanes bring sea surges and floods, extreme rainfall events, and of course above all drought, which is the silent elephant in the climatic room.
good news is that it's getting so obvious that you don't have to be able to count or know any science to wonder. If your home is underwater, as are the homes of 300,000 neighbors, you don't have to be a perceptual genius to notice. If your home is burned to the ground along with 40,000 others in the hottest summer ever on record, you don't have to be a mathematical whiz to notice that something unusual is going on.
Well, last year we had the most horrific summer that I can remember living in Texas. Temperatures over 100 degrees for over 90 days. We saw just our normal lush green landscape turn brown and die, and it was just, the term that everybody uses is just brutal, because that's exactly what it was.
This is, you know, for the last week I've just been so close to breaking down and crying. I mean, there's really nothing of value here for a cow to eat.
Some years you get rain, some years you don't get rain. Last year we went through the worst drought we've had here since the 50s probably. And
in a very private way. It's a sort of a private sense of anxiety, but it's not necessarily translating into the public awareness or public spaces, public discourse.
Something that we can't see, something that we can't touch, something that we can't experience, and it's not something that we know a lot about. So it's an unknown in many, many ways. And because it's an unknown, I think it's incredibly terrifying for many. Maybe so terrifying that it becomes difficult to do anything about, because the idea of collapse, the end of the world as we know it, the engulfing of our buildings with water, whatever climate change means to very different people, it's a very, very scary idea. And scary ideas are hard to do something about. You know, when you're motivated by fear or terror, it's going to be very, very difficult to act against that, because it's an omnipresent force that one drop in the ocean could do nothing to combat.
The planet's done very well without us for 99.99% of its history. It did very well. And then we've come along as this young upstart messing around with things and had started a chain reaction, which is now
You know, you can buy a bomb shelter and you can stock it with all this freeze-dried food and all this bottled water, but all that stuff had to come from a factory somewhere. What is it going to mean if we have to re-inject a degree of self-reliance in our lives?
I've moved out of the city. I live somewhere with plenty of land, a river, walled gardens. I've got chickens, sheep, you know. I don't think I could feed myself, even if, in the ideal circumstance, with the right weather, without any people around trying to shoot me and steal my food, even then it would be incredibly hard.
Moving from that sense of, oh my God, this is terrible. What can I do? What can we do? We have to gather all the things that are really precious to us and head up onto the top of a mountain with 4 years worth of baked beans and toilet paper and sit in a cave somewhere and with a shotgun, to actually thinking, well, either we all get through this or we don't all get through this.
We've built this magnificent set of structures that empowers us, but you have to put quotes around that word because we're not really empowered. If anything breaks down in that system, or conversely, if we decide the system is unsustainable, that there are problems in that system, we're really stuck.
It's said that there is no city more than 3 days away from a revolution, and that's because of food supply. Our industries have perfected just-in-time delivery so that everything is produced and delivered to industries and to your stores just as it's needed. No one keeps stockpiles anymore because it's too expensive to keep stockpiles. It's inefficient. But what this means is that our production and delivery systems are highly vulnerable to disruption.
100 years ago, it was about self-reliance, and today it's about an individual who is an individual in name alone. Because that person, that man or woman, is totally reliant on a set of systems to keep consuming all the things that he or she is consuming.
Today we've institutionalized innovation, and so we think that innovation and constant change and constant churning in societies is normal. In fact, it's not normal. It's a function of the way we've lived for the past 200 years. In the past, archaeologists can show that innovations were unusual. There were periods of hundreds of years, and in some cases thousands, even tens of thousands of years, with little or no technological change.
From Genesis in the Old Testament, man has dominion over the fish in the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on this earth. And God saith to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it.
Are we so blind so as to not be able to see that that conduct, that way of life, is in fact threatening to our species?
We have technology, we have science, we have electronics, we have plenty of things that our ancestors didn't have, but eventually
on the long time frame. Not a time frame for my children, but a time frame for my great-great-grandchildren and further beyond.
And I think the basic misconception that we all carry with ourselves is that the human future is a long-term future, that we have somehow, if we can get through this, we have thousands, millions of years ahead of us. We're all going to die sometime as a species. I mean, all species die sometime. They don't last forever, or they evolve into something else. But if you look at the implications of accelerating change, it suggests no, actually, the end of our line is coming much, much, much sooner. And that's the way it is.
If this is true, and the effective end of our line could be coming much, much sooner than we think, and knowing what in our nature and biology prevents us from acting, is there anything we can do? How are we going to live in this future that we have created for ourselves? With a harsh and alien climate and the unimaginable upheavals to this comfortable way of life. We are living in a momentous time, facing our most important test ever. There was a 40-year window of opportunity to shift away from fossil fuels and to stabilize our population at reasonable levels to prevent the most serious effects of climate change. But that window has almost closed now, as CO2 emissions and human population numbers continue to rise. Mankind faces a challenge unlike any other in its history, and it's a problem that evolution did not equip us to solve. It will take a worldwide, wartime, coordinated effort to reverse course. So if you think this is possible, then we might have a chance. But the climate and population problem will be solved. Likely not by us. Nature will make the necessary corrections, and we will have to scramble to adapt and hopefully survive. It won't be pretty, as this world will become a very different place, with far fewer species, collapsing populations, and much, much harsher living conditions for all. All civilizations eventually collapse, and 99% of all species that ever existed have gone extinct. So history is not on our side. Life will go on, however, as it has for billions of years. But whether or not it will include us, that's to be seen.
What separates us from the world of nature is our intellect. If you don't change the values that are driving this world right now, you're not going to survive.
Those generations yet to come may look back and say, what were they thinking? What were they doing?
Because we really believe that Mother Earth's going to take care of itself. It's always creating, dissolving, and recreating. It's us that haven't got the message.
Our fate is in our own hands. No one else.